Story 1. My eyes swelled in tears as I took my last breaths. Then everything went black. Instantly, it seemed like I was somewhere else. It was as though I stepped through a doorway in the back of my mind and into another dimension. I first noticed the floor, or rather the absence of it. There was a thick mist or fog that covered the ground up to my knees. The very next thing I noticed was the sound of music. It soothed me. I didn't know the song, but it seemed familiar. It was symphonically orchestral and with brass, strings, and woodwinds, but the sound was still subtle. The sound seemed to be coming from my right, so I looked in that direction. I saw a deep void of darkness like an astronaut who looked into the stars from orbit. Then I looked in front of me and saw my deceased grandmother. She was standing just in front of the white light. The light radiated warmth, love, and anything I needed to know. I also noticed other figures off to my left. They seemed peaceful in pairs, holding each other and swaying with the music. My grandmother delivered the choice to me. I could stay with her or go back to my life. She told me that if I stayed, everything would be okay. She said that if I went back to my body, it would be the most challenging experience I would ever endure. Then she showed me my grieving family. It was like I was transported to the moment when my loved ones were talking about me. I saw my other grandparent who was still alive. She was driving to the hospital to see me. My papa was consoling my grandma, saying, "Don't cry, he's going to make it." I also saw my best friends driving to see me at the hospital. They were saying how bad it was and how I didn't look like myself. I also saw my mother and aunt in the hospital watching over me. I saw their tears and the uncertainty in their expressions. The night of the car accident, there was a friend of my aunt whom I had never met. She woke my aunt up in the middle of the night to say that a young man my aunt knew was in terrible danger. This friend of my aunt happened to be a sensitive. My aunt called my mother right afterwards. My mother had just got off the phone with the sheriff's office. She had seen a vision of her mother and I laughing and having a good time. This was during the same time as my NDE. I also had a premonition dream 3 years before the car accident. This story was shared by William C. and happened in 2002.
Story 2. I found myself in this pink and purple atmosphere, floating slowly through pink and purple clouds. I was an infant and being carried over the shoulder of someone I thought was my grandmother. Following behind us were 2 teeny tiny cherubs. They were very small and had wings. They were naked with short curly hair and were neither sex. One was solid pink and the other solid purple. It was like they were trying to keep me entertained, and they did. I was trying to catch or touch them, with much laughter and giggles. They were fluttering around us like hummingbirds. The scenery changed to a beautiful landscape of green valleys and hills. I could not see what was to the left, but I could hear the laughter of children playing. I asked if I could go there. I heard a voice in the distance saying,
"No, you're too young."
Then the scenery and atmosphere changed to a brilliant pastel blue. Standing in midair were these huge golden gates. Beyond the gates, there was nothing but a brilliant white light. We heard a loud voice, neither male nor female, coming from all around us saying,
"She needs to go back. It's not her time."
Through the years as a child, I questioned my mother about this experience and told her I wanted to go back there. I never got a clear answer. At the age of 12, I brought it up again. She loved my story and was familiar with it, but at first, she would not give me an answer. She then told me that when I was around 6 months old, I had died in my grandfather's arms. Unbelievably, I remembered this, and I exclaimed to my mom, "Yes!" I remembered him holding me, crying and screaming, saying to me, "If you die, I will too." Mom was in shock over how I could have known this, because you were only 6 months old. This memory is so vivid today, it's like it happened only yesterday. I have been trying to find someone else who has had an experience similar to this, with the tiny cherubs. This story was shared by Joanne P. and happened in 1943.
Story 3. I became aware that we were out of our bodies and quickly flying up toward space, holding hands. We flew straight up for a minute or so when we started to see a park or countryside-like landscape. It seemed to be twilight, dark, but we could see trees, bushes, etc. Suddenly, 4 creatures intercepted us. They seemed about 10 feet in height and were invisible, but we could see a vague humanoid outline. My best description would be like the invisibility effect in the movie Predator. Two flanked each of us and began to gently separate us. They overwhelmed us with a feeling of the highest love and compassion that was well beyond anything we could experience on earth. A divine love. We therefore had no resistance to their effort. I recall feeling sort of like a baby in mother's arms, but it's hard to accurately describe. Two of them moved her upward toward the distant landscape, and two moved me back downward. I felt so much love, peace, and comfort that I wanted to protest and say, "No, please let me stay here," but I heard inwardly, psychically, that I could not stay. Next, I could see my car in flames from maybe about a quarter of a mile up above. I felt a sensation of falling and awakened in the car. The front was on fire. I moved her from leaning on me as she was when I fell asleep, knowing that her body was an empty shell. I had left her above with those beings. In shock, I made a few failed attempts to get out of the car, not knowing why my feet couldn't be lifted. They were through the floor. After waking and passing out a few times, I saw someone approaching the car. The man, a passing trucker, saw the flames as he passed and turned back to see if someone was inside. He was startled by my appearance, told me not to worry and that he would get help. I recall being removed from the car by firemen. The fire was now on the dashboard. I regained and lost consciousness many times between the crash site, the hospital in Welland, and then the hospital in the U.S. A couple of weeks later, I was in intensive care and overwhelmed with grief and guilt at having lost a person their life. She came in through my window as a classic woman in white apparition, and again I heard without physically hearing that I shouldn't blame myself and that everything was as it should be. This has been very difficult for me to write. It still makes me cry. She then floated out of the door into the hallway right between two nurses who obviously didn't see her. I am still amazed by it all. This story was shared by William M. and happened in 1984.
Story 4. I was standing over the doctors watching them work on me. I wasn't scared, I was fascinated. I could see everyone. They seemed extremely hurried, and I remember it amused me because I was no longer in pain. I remember being pulled backwards, and when I turned, I was in an earthy tunnel. A door was before me that opened into a spectacular light. The light was brilliant, but it did not hurt. As I passed into it, it glowed with warmth, love, knowledge, and understanding. Not just my own knowledge, but knowledge of everything. I had complete understanding, collective but separate. Everything made sense. Everything was more vivid and the colors were brighter and deeper. Everything was tranquil and at peace the moment I crossed into the light. I was now standing in a lush rolling meadow, covered with blooms and trees. I felt a strong and powerful presence. Even more wonderful, I knew my family was with me. The presence had a deep, resonating voice that touched the core of your soul. I don't remember what the voice told me, but the peace and calm seemed to magnify. I remember sitting in the meadow. I was cradling something in my arms and asked to cross a small, free-flowing stream. After not being allowed, I asked to stay. I did not want to go back. I knew the peace, warmth, and light could not follow me back. I tried to walk toward the stream, but then I was being pulled down and backwards through the door. I remember leaving the warm glow of the light and being filled with immense sadness, as all of the knowledge and peace left me. My senses dimmed, and my vision seemed muddied compared to the brilliant vibrancy of the meadow. I was angry, mad. I felt the air being knocked out of me as I hit my body and the pain returned. I remember the nurse saying she's back, and I started sobbing, telling them I didn't want to come back. I begged for them to send me to the light. The nurse just kept saying, "Stay with us. Don't close your eyes, just stay with us," and she was holding my hand. When I think about it, I am filled with an extreme sense of grief and loss, but I know that I will be returning someday, and then they will let me cross the stream. This story was shared by Christy C. and happened in 2000.
Story 5. I recall being dragged from my body and into the whiteness. It was a bit difficult to comprehend. I was unsure of where I was or how I arrived there, and it was as if I had no form or body. I was simply there, like in a purgatory state waiting for something. I felt a strange sense of emptiness and sadness. I walked to the other side and I saw the man who played the wizard in The Wizard of Oz. He was behind a curtain spinning a wheel. When I looked at him, he stopped. He then made the sheesh sign with his finger and continued to turn the wheel. In a flash, I was in another place. It's a bit strange and hard to describe. I didn't see anyone, but I could feel my mother and great aunt. At this point, I realized, oh no, I'm dead. At that point, I was pulled into another abyss that landed me in a different dimension. I remember arriving at what seemed to be some kind of huge celebration. It was like entering a packed football arena on an NFL game day. A roar was heard from the background. My entire circle of acquaintances and relatives, both alive and dead, and all these familiar faces were present. I was walking towards what appeared to be an old Greek Colosseum. People were cheering and happy, but they didn't notice me. Suddenly, someone looked at me with a deer in headlights expression. I didn't recognize them, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. Everything stopped and everyone turned to look at me. I heard people saying my name and calling for my grandmother. It felt like I was in a movie and everyone was there to welcome me to heaven. But I had a feeling I came too soon. I was terrified and didn't know what was real. Nobody spoke, but I knew what they were saying. I felt rejected and ran away. I had a flash of my neighbor's lawn and slowly started to come to. The police and ambulance were there and people looked at me like they saw a ghost. I asked if I was dead and the EMT said, not anymore. This story was shared by Anonymous and happened many years ago.